What could make you turn against a mafia family that offers huge financial gains and generational wealth? In this video, Real Muse dives into the life of Henry Hill Jr., the man whose memoir, Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, inspired the movie Goodfellas. We're here to give you the facts Goodfellas didn't explain, including the betrayals that may have motivated Henry to turn state's evidence and expose his closest allies. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and stay tuned as we share the true story of Henry Hill. Henry Hill was born on June 11, 1943, in Brooklyn, New York. He was the family's fifth child and firstborn son, which excited his father so much Henry Hill Sr. had flowers delivered to the hospital.
When Henry was born, for the first time ever, according to my mother, my father sent her a dozen roses, but he didn't send them to her. He wrote the card to my son. He really was proud when he had this son.
Hill Sr., an Irish-American electrician, was a hard-working man who despised gangsters. However, his mother, an immigrant and Sicilian housewife, would be all Henry needed for his ticket into the mob. The movie Goodfellas is right about one thing. Henry was obsessed with the mob from a young age. But what the film doesn't show is just how much trouble he had in school. Henry struggled with dyslexia, a language-based learning disability that primarily affects reading and spelling.
They thought I was a fucking goof-off, you know what I mean? They thought I was doing it on purpose. I mean, I couldn't fucking read.
His dyslexia motivated him to cut class frequently. Although the mafia lifestyle was appealing to him, he didn't realize his new part-time job would open the door to a life of crime. The older Henry got, he began to understand school was never an option for him. In 1955, at 12 years old, Henry started working as an errand boy for Tutti Vario, the brother of Paul Vario, a local capo in the Lucchese crime family. At the time, Paul Vario ruled Brownsville, East New York. Paul Vario was an established made man, and he owned the cab stand across the street from Henry's family residence. Vario's brother, Tutti, ran the cab stand and was in search of an errand boy who could meet his business demands. Tutti Vito Vario, who ran the cab stand, had been looking for a sharp and speedy kid for weeks. Tutti had lost his left leg in the Korean War, and even though he had adapted to his disability, he still couldn't move about as swiftly as he wished. In his role as errand boy, Henry was able to gain trust amongst Vario and his crew. He could take an order and return to Tutti while the coffee was still hot and the beer ice cold, something other neighborhood kids couldn't grasp.
I washed the car better than the car washers. You know, they showed me once and I made sure that I did it, correctly. I was getting a lot of approval from them that I wasn't getting at home.
My father didn't want him to work there at all because he knew who these people were, and he wanted all of us to stay away from them.
Within the year, he was delivering messages for Paul Vario between runs, collecting numbers, and selling fireworks. His status among the mob and his neighborhood grew to infamy. But the film makes it seem like Henry was immediately embraced by the mob. In reality, he was more of a glorified errand boy before he earned their trust. Henry's association with Vario graduated from errand boy to earner for the crime family a few years later. Now part of the mafia, Henry was expected to live by a strict set of principles, known as omertà. Rooted in codes of silence, respect, and loyalty, these commandments help the mob enforce norms and settle disputes. These rules are the foundation of the mafia's decision-making, and members must abide by these oral laws to reach economic goals. You must never betray any of the secrets of the Cosa Nostra. You must never become involved with narcotics. You must never violate the wife or children of another member. Any violation of these rules will result in a penalty of death, a punishment Henry would see play out over the course of his time in the mafia. Henry's life in the mob is where Goodfellas both shines and strays from reality. The movie gets his close ties with Jimmy Burke right. However, Jimmy was more psychotic and manipulative in real life than the film portrays. Jimmy, played by Robert De Niro, earned his moniker Jimmy the Gent for stuffing $50 into the pockets of the drivers he hijacked. In his memoir, Wise Guy, Henry shares a story about Jimmy giving $5,000 to an impoverished mother. She had cried to Jimmy about a loan to her adult son who now refused to pay her back. Jimmy paid off the loan, telling the woman it was from her son. Then, He whacked her son before sunrise. Jimmy had grown up an orphan and valued the idea of family. He simply couldn't understand who would treat their own mother so disrespectfully. Acts like this kept Jimmy's friends and colleagues on edge.
He was a fucking maniac. And people knew that they couldn't cross that fucking line with him. You crossed that fucking line with him, you were dead. And you didn't get a second chance. He'd dish you to fucking death, take you to dinner and then fucking kill you, for dessert. I mean, that was Jimmy.
On a more controversial note, Tommy DeVito seems to be inspired by a combination of valuable figures in Henry's early life. Two of Paul Vario's sons and gangster Tommy DeSimone can each claim witness to some of Goodfellas' most famous scenes, acted out by Joe Pesci. In Goodfellas, Henry is said to have gone to jail for the first time after selling cigarettes with Tommy. In real life, a 16-year-old Henry experienced his first arrest after Tootie handed him a stolen credit card to buy tires with Lenny Vario, Paul Vario's youngest son. Lenny was able to flee cops and report Henry's arrest to the crew. At the time, Paul Vario was serving 30 days on contempt. It was Lenny's uncle Tootie who bailed Henry out. As expressed in the film, it was considered his graduation.
They celebrated. I broke my cherry, that's what they were saying. Maybe it was difficult for someone else to get arrested, but, for us type of guys, it was no big deal.
The Mafia had given Henry a sense of belonging. He had become a part of a new family that was often proud of his daily activities, a stark contrast to Henry's birth family. Henry Hill Sr. became disappointed with his son's choices. One of Henry's most shameful acts inspired him to join the military at 17. Henry had been sneaking his dad's .38 revolver to the cab stand for Tootie to use as needed. It had been routine for Henry to return his dad's gun to its usual hiding place. One day, Henry found himself searching for the gun. His dad had moved it. Neither father nor son ever spoke about it. A fearful Henry awaited his father's rage, then decided to surprise his dad with a new venture. In 1960, Henry enlisted in the Army. He served in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division for 5 years before being discharged for starting a brawl with Marines and stealing a sheriff's car.
I think my father thought he would be normal then, once Henry went in the service, and that he would conform to regular life.
I got in a lot of trouble, I had a couple court-martials, drinking and just fucking carrying on, fighting the Marines.
He started to resume some of his criminal activities that he learned in Brooklyn, such as gambling, shylocking. He was lending people money.
After the Army, Henry and Lenny Vario became inseparable. This relationship provided Henry even more trust and support from the Vario crew. With Lenny as a close friend, Henry was able to snag jobs in construction as a union bricklayer and maitre d' hotel at Azores restaurant. Owned off the record by Thomas Lucchese, the boss of the whole family. His construction role supplied him with a union card that would later convince Karen he was legit.
She didn't know what I did in the beginning. She knew that, I kind of, I thought I was a union delegate, and she was apart from that world that I was in.
You get a union card certifying that you're a member in good standing of this union and therefore are entitled to be paid union wages. And even better than that, you will get a no-show job. You would go once a week and pick up your paycheck.
Another moment in Goodfellas that places Tommy in someone else's shoes is when Henry met Karen. In real life, Henry's double date with Karen included Paul Vario's oldest son, Paulie Jr. As portrayed in the movie, Henry was not excited to be there and abandoned Karen on the second date. It was Paulie Jr. who took Karen to confront Henry at the cab stand, and the rest is history.
She made me feel great, and it was just the chemistry was there. It was, it was instant love.
Henry and Karen fell in love and eloped after 4 months of dating. His best friend, Lenny Vario, joined them as a witness. But Lenny got too drunk and the officiant's wife had to sign the marriage license. Later that year, the couple hosted a wedding ceremony. In contrast to what is shown in the film, neither of Henry's father figures were present. Paul Vario was incarcerated and Hill Sr. refused to be around Henry's mafia friends.
At their wedding, the Varios, and all of their associates came. And when they walked in, they came in together, and everybody in the place everybody got stone dead silence.
Henry appreciated his life with the Mafia. It afforded him access to things he could never have if he were one of the suckers working a shitty job for bum paychecks. In January of 1967, Henry participated in the Air France heist, taking home $480,000. With his portion of earnings, he took over the Sweet Lounge on Queens Boulevard near Forest Hills. Karen had wanted him to invest in something legit. Paul Vario even ordered the place off limits for the crew. However, one by one, gangsters started to show up to wish Henry congratulations. Within 6 months, the suite had become a gathering place for Henry and his friends. Instead of making his life simpler, the suite made Henry's life crazier, especially the night he hosted the coming home party of William Billy Batts Bentvena. The murder of Billy Batts captured our attention in the opening scene of Goodfellas. Did his death really play out as seen in the film? Kind of. The movie leaves out a key detail. Tommy didn't kill Batts on a whim. The hit took place weeks after Batts' shoe-shining comment. Jimmy had teased Tommy about the comment for weeks in hopes that Tommy's emotions would outweigh an important mafia rule: never touch a made man without permission. You see, it benefited Jimmy to have Batts out of the picture. He had taken over Batts' affairs while away in prison and had no desire to give it back. In Goodfellas, the murder of Billy Batts would lead to Tommy's demise. But Tommy wasn't vengefully shot in the face like the movie suggests. In real life, no one knows how Tommy DeSimone died. In Henry's memoir, Wise Guy, he states Bruno Facciolo and Petey Vario were going to vouch for Tommy to become a made man. They were to pick him up and drive him to his ceremony. This all turned out to be a setup. Somehow, the Gambino family had gotten proof of Tommy having killed Billy Batts and a guy named Foxy. They had a sit down with Paul Vario, who gave them the okay to kill Tommy. There was never a funeral like Goodfellas suggests. The theory is, while Henry was serving a bid, Karen began an affair with Paul Vario. Tommy also took Henry's time away from home as a chance to make a move on Karen. However, Karen refused Tommy's advances, and in response, he beat her up. When Paul Vario got news of Tommy's attempt to sexually assault his mistress, he tipped off the Gambino family about DeSimone's involvement in Batts' disappearance. Today, Tommy DeSimone remains a missing person, presumed dead. One of the biggest crimes Henry was involved in was the Lufthansa Heist of 1978, where nearly $6 million was stolen from JFK Airport. The movie only touches on it briefly, but like portrayed in the film, in real life, Henry played a small role in setting it up. During this time, he was too busy managing his own personal schemes to know when the robbery would actually occur. While Goodfellas suggests Henry's connections with drugs was just a side hustle, he was very deeply involved. Henry began selling drugs in prison and continued the business after his release. He had a growing addiction which made him unreliable and a liability to the Lucchese family. Tommy and Jimmy participated in Hill's drug game, an act that prioritized relationship and love for money over mafia principles. They also took part in the 1978 to 1979 Boston College basketball point-shaving scheme. Using Henry's connections from prison, they were able to rig basketball games with athletes. He also began wholesaling marijuana, cocaine, heroin, uppers, and quaaludes. Although Henry's side hustle was an extensive illegal drug operation, his biggest concern was waiting for the smoke to blow over from the Lufthansa heist.
Jimmy and Paulie started whacking everybody. He justified it by, insulating himself and Paulie and our family from everybody else involved.
Jimmy Burke had grown paranoid about being caught and was getting rid of loose ends. Henry did not want to be next. Surprisingly, Henry's world would crumble under the words of a 19-year-old confidential informant. The kid had been busted for selling $1,200 worth of quaaludes to undercover cops. In exchange for leniency, he tipped off Nassau detective Daniel Mann, promising to give up an organized crime drug ring. By the 1980s, Henry was in serious trouble. He got busted for drug trafficking, and he knew that if he didn't flip, he'd either spend the rest of his life in prison or end up dead like the others.
They had the wiretaps, they had surveillance, that is, detectives who were watching and following. They had the airline tickets, and Henry was in a very tight box.
So he did what no good fellow was ever supposed to do. He ratted.
When Henry flipped, he became public enemy number one to anybody who was involved in any organized crime or criminal activity that I ever ran into. Henry was as hated a person as you could think of.
I remember thinking it was predictable that he would turn state's evidence because he was a rat as a kid. If you cornered Henry, he'd sell his soul. He didn't care as long as he got out of it.
Just like in the film, Henry testified against his old friends. His testimony led to dozens of convictions, including Jimmy Burke's and his boss, Paul Vario. In 1982, Jimmy was sentenced to 12 years for his involvement with the Boston College basketball point shaving scandal. Using Henry's testimony, he was also later sentenced to an additional 20 years for the 1979 murder of drug dealer Richard Eaton. While in prison, he developed cancer and died on April 13, 1996. In 1984, Paul Vario received 4 years for defrauding the government. He had arranged a fictitious restaurant job so Henry could be released from federal prison. The following year, with the help of Henry's testimony, Vario was sentenced to 10 years for extorting over $350,000 from air cargo companies at JFK Airport. On May 3, 1988, Vario would die of lung cancer at 73. But what happened after? That's where Goodfellas leaves us hanging. Henry Hill couldn't stay out of trouble. Unlike in the movie where he fades into obscurity, the real Henry was kicked out of the witness protection program in 1987 after receiving 5 years of probation for cocaine trafficking. In 1990, after 23 years of marriage, Karen Friedman Hill filed for divorce. It would later be finalized in 2002. Today, she and their 2 children, Greg and Gina, continue to use aliases to protect their identities. Greg and Gina Hill would later share their childhood experience in their memoir, On the Run, A Mafia Childhood. Henry struggled with addiction the rest of his life. In 2009, he told the Associated Press, "I've been on every drug humanly possible, and I can't get a handle on alcohol." He spent years jumping from job to job. He had written the Wise Guy cookbook, sold mob-related artwork online, and even made appearances at mafia conventions.
I work in the industry, whatever that is. The entertainment industry, I guess. Got a travel guide, a Goodfellas travel guide coming out. We're working on a reality TV show. We just did a movie. It's a totally different life. I'll tell you, there's some shocks in Hollywood. They're as bad as the crew that I left.
He later admitted that while he missed the money, he didn't miss the paranoia of mob life. On June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday, Henry Hill Jr. passed from heart disease. Lisa Caserta, his partner and manager, told CBS News, "He went out pretty peacefully for a good fella. I never killed anyone personally, but I buried a lot of bodies. They would whack somebody and I had to go and dig the hole. I witnessed a lot of executions, maybe 10. I've seen guys killed for nothing. I've had many sleepless nights, and I still do today." Henry Hill. So, was Goodfellas accurate? In some ways, yes. But it left out a lot. Henry's real life was even messier, more dangerous, and in some ways sadder than the Hollywood version. Let us know in the comments what surprised you the most about the real Henry Hill Jr. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the true history behind famous movies.